3 Lives 3 Worlds. The Pillow Book. Lower volume. Original work by Tangqi Gongzi. English translation, Hamster 428. English editing, Rockharlequin, Lily, JoannaKuang. Part 4 The Shadow's Souls. Chapter 8. The sky was overcast with rain. Light drizzle had been pattering down for 1 3/4 of an hour. At exactly 1, a letter came from the front manor. Mo Xiao was reclining against the window pane and listening to the rainfall as he made tea. He lazily spread the letter out to read and saw a few of Fengju's agreeing words. An anticipated smile spread over his face. Who was it that created this world? There was once when Sumoy suspected it was Chen Yat, but this person had been treating Feng Ju, who was masquerading as Aranya, with scarcely a difference compared to before. If it was truly Chen Yat, according to how he was described after Aranya's death, he should be cherishing her as though she was a precious treasure now that she had come back, even if she was only a fake. This superficial air of indifference was certainly food for thought. On top of this, it had been some days since Daijun was last seen. Although Daijun's whereabouts was not always predictable, a complete disappearance wasn't very common either. Whatever Daijun might be planning, consciously, Mo Xiao did not dare to venture a guess. Recently, Daijun seemed to have used him very conveniently, often placing cues of responsibility onto his shoulders. One more day without knowing Daijun's plans meant a couple more days of peace and fewer days of headache. He selfishly hoped Daijun would disappear for much, much longer. In another building, Fengjoo became disconsolate ever since she sent the message. The Aranya in Mo Xiao's memory had gripped a blade with her bare hand, all casual and cool. She tore a sleeve, with swashbuckling air. Fengjoo found a wood-cutting cleaver somewhat similar to the legendary holy saber. But while weighing it in her hand, she lost all senses before the blade even had a chance to touch her skin. She switched to rehearsing the sleeve, tearing and bandaging scene instead. Still, no damage was done to even the sleeve corner by the time her hands were red. To Fengjoo, Aranya had been every bit heroic, but she had also been awfully troublesome. If the blood was released in advance, she could take a pocket container and, upon her arrival on Lingshu Terrace, pierce a knife into the sack of blood. Should she just do that then? Would it seem awkward at all? She stressed herself out, haggard thinking about this day and night. Junyo's death sentence was set for the 7th of April. On the 2nd of April, Fengjoo watched the night sky and heaved in relief. The 3 enclosures and 28 mansions scattered in the sky. A lunar aureole was seen in the Taiwei enclosure. Although her astrology learning was shoddy at best, she at least knew this was a pardoning sign, and she was able to relax a little. After relaxing, she suddenly realized that in this theatrical script of Mo Xiao's, Lord Zai's also played an important role. In the past, Aranya could freely orchestrate her lies in front of Shangjun because Lord Zai's did not leave the mountains. But this time, Zai's was always hanging around Shangjun. Should she first inform him before she started fibbing lies? Where was Lord Zai's these days, anyhow? Amid her thoughts, she suddenly saw from the distant horizon a silvery blue aurora. Fengjoo knew there were boundaries in this world. The skyline naturally wasn't a true skyline. From its direction, it seemed to be coming from the Shuiyu swamp by the Bala forest. Shuiyu Swamp in the original Fanyan Valley was previously an off-limits hot spring open only to the queen. The Shuiyu Swamp in this environment was off-limits to even the royal family, making it more mysterious. In a word or two, Mo Xiao once mentioned that Shuiyu Swamp acted as a channel between this world and a different one. It neither followed the rules of this world, nor was it bound by the laws of newly created ones. It was a dangerous and also very chaotic place. Given that it was such a place, it was unusual that there now suddenly appeared an aurora, even if for only a moment. Mo Xiao had an observation of Fengjoo that was very accurate, and that was that she had a very big curiosity. One soundless incantation later, this curious girl was already standing on a boulder in the middle of the swamp at the end of the Bala forest. She had only steadied herself and had yet to glance around when she heard a hum as tiny as a mosquito's buzz behind her. Miss, you're blocking me. Can you move over a little?" Fengjoo started and turned around. A few steps away was a large umbrella made from the joining of many lotus leaves. An extremely garish glare of emerald green, it resembled a shield that was erected beside the water. The small reminding sound had come from that way. Fengjoo edged a few steps over, then slightly parted a lotus leaf. A child emerged behind it. He looked at her in surprise for a tiniest second, then immediately stepped aside to allow her in while shyly saying, "I hadn't known you were such a beautiful Jija. Come, sit by my side. The best spots in this row are already taken. Luckily, since I am small, I can share some space with you." Fengjoo didn't really know what it was they were doing, but taking a look at the seat, she comfortably sat down in the spirit of freeloading off of others. Glancing around, the place was really packed with children. All held a lotus stem to conceal themselves as they devotedly looked to the sky. Fengjoo flicked the lotus leaf in front of her. "What do you guys set this up for?" she asked. This is a camouflage," the little boy told her animatedly. "Master Serpent who inhabits this lake is fighting with a formidable deity. The fight will probably be awesome to behold, so all of us fish sprites rushed out to watch. We use the lotus leaves to avoid being noticed by Master Serpent, hee." Fengjoo's lips twitched. It must not have been easy for Master Serpent to overlook these garish leaves up till now. But also wondering why she had seen the aurora, she asked in genuine curiosity, "Who is the deity that is trying to capture the serpent?" "This water serpent." "Master Serpent, what crime has he committed?" The little boy handed Fengjoo a handful of edamame, moved a bit closer to her, then gestured his finger toward the farther end of Shuiyu Swamp. "It's like this," he said. "There is an ice coffin under this lake which emits immense divine essence. Encased in it is a sleeping beauty. I came across it when I was playing around here. The divine essence inside the coffin sometimes flows out, which then attracts Master Serpent on the other end of the lake. Because the coffin is guarded with a superb enchantment, Master Serpent only dared to lurk nearby and eat the leaking essence at first. He later became insatiable and wanted to break the ice coffin to release all of the divine essence. But Master Serpent wasn't lucky that day. At exactly the same time he struck the ice coffin, this formidable deity passed by and fought him off. They've been fighting for 2 days. Right now they are most likely on the far side of the lake, so we won't be able to see anything. They'll come back in a while. Let's take a break and eat boiled peanuts and peas." He then handed Fengjoo more edamame. As she peeled the peas, Fengjoo thought to herself that this matter of a sleeping beauty at the bottom of the lake was rather fascinating. But it was currently not safe. Once the two challengers returned from the water, she would go down for a view. Chewing tasteless soybeans in her mouth, Fengjoo sighed that these fish sprites quite understood how to enjoy life. Sitting in other people's place, eating other people's beans, she couldn't help herself from giving them a few culinary suggestions. Does your tribe have the 7-flavor herb? You should grind some that has been sun-dried and store it in a small jar. When you boil peanuts and peas, or roast melon seeds and chestnuts, you can add a spoonful of it. It'll taste a lot better. The little boy blinked his misty eyes a few times. Full of admiration, he sincerely accepted her suggestion. Soon enough, waves surged skyward from the distance as expected. The lotus leaves before their eyes also shook a little, the movement producing a gap. Fengjoo took this chance to toss her pile of edamame shells out. The little boy held onto his lotus stem and said in excitement, "Look, they came back." He handed her another handful of edamame. Fengjoo gasped as she lifted her head. The radiance of the towering trees inside the swamp rendered the forest as bright as daytime. Layers upon layers of fog shrouded the turquoise canopies. In the distance, it looked very much like the jade terrace on Zhuangtian. Presently, this stage was occupied by a struggling silver water serpent. And there under the moonlight opposite the silver serpent was a fluttering figure holding a sword. Was he not Lord Zeiss whom she hadn't seen for several days? The purple-robed deity was utterly calm. He floated atop the largest balo canopy, the crescent new moon hanging behind him, his wide sleeves waving about in the breeze. This was the first time Fengjoo saw Zai Shenjun wielding a sword. Most of the time when she saw him, he was tinkering with herbs, so she egoistically assumed he was feeble and frail. Now seeing him face the serpent with might and authority, she thought this aura actually seemed to suit him better. There was a nice familiarity in his sword-wielding image. The silver serpent had long dwelt under the swamp, and was therefore especially proficient underwater. It rumbled a cry. As much as half of the water in the lake shot up. In midair, the water transformed into crystallized ice projectiles, blasting straight at the purple-robed deity. As Fengjoo watched the spectacle, she thought how fortunate it had been that Zeiss was an original inhabitant of this world and could create a protective barrier. Outsiders like herself would be subjected to magic restrictions. Ordinary spells were all right, but stronger magic was forbidden. In such times like this, she would definitely be turned into a pockmarked screen by the projectile hail. The projectile hail was surging toward him, but Zeiss did not cast any protective barrier. Instead, he whirled around and drew his sword. The projectiles were blasted away amidst the snow-white flashes of the blade. When the radiance from Zeiss' hand diminished, she saw him use the blade to gently deflect the last few clusters of projectiles, firing them back at an angry silver serpent. The silver serpent curled up in avoidance. The purple-robed deity calmly noticed the gap and quickly made his move. The blade force grazed the serpent, cleanly slicing off its tail. The silver serpent screeched in agony. Its severed tail thrashed down into the bale of forest beneath, leveling trees and dyeing the treetops with chunks of blood. Soon, it spread into the water, the reek of blood overwhelming. The fish sprites were so riveted that their eyes glowed bright. The little one next to Fengjoo forgot to peel his edamame in excitement. He grabbed tightly onto Fengjoo's shirt tail and said, "Master Serpent is a multi-tailed serpent. His tail can regrow 49 times. It always grew back the last 49 times the moment it got cut off. But look, it no longer regrows this time." Fengjoo was stupefied. For fear that she was wrong, she said in hesitation, "A moment ago, I seemed to see that the deity did not resort to any magic. Did he counter the arrow storm and also cut off your master serpent's tail using only his swordsmanship?" The little boy fisted his hands and nodded. "The fighting has been that way for 2 days past. Had the powerful deity used magic, the fight wouldn't have lasted so long. My mother said the most detrimental thing in these fights is having too large of a disparity between the opponents. What is there to watch if the outcome is determined within 2 or 3 moves? What make fights fun are their uncertain winning chances, the fighters' lives hanging in the balance, the viewers' hearts also hanging in the balance. Making the viewers reluctant to move their eyes is the responsibility of a brilliant fighter. The formidable deity is so responsible, isn't he? Slaying a water serpent with merely a sword was comparable to capturing a tiger with only bare hands. How sick was this man's swordplay, anyway?" After a prolonged silence, Fengjoo carefully weighed in, "His lordship does have a great sense of responsibility. Your mother is very perceptive." A pleased expression rose on the little boy's face. Then suddenly, he yelled in surprise, "Yeah, Master Serpent has fled into the water." He anxiously added, "Doesn't he know that his wound will bleed worst underwater?" Fengjoo lamented to herself that this little fish sprite was too knowledgeable. She turned her neck toward the battlefield where the sound originated from. While she was searching around, a large wave suddenly burst forth from the swamp. The serpent which sank to the bottom of the water unexpectedly shot out. Above his head was a mass of white light. Within that white light was a subtly discernible coffin. Lord Zai's complexion, which had been calm throughout, actually seemed to have slightly changed. Fengjoo wondered whether this thing on the Silver Serpent's head was the ice coffin containing the sleeping beauty as mentioned by the fish sprite. Momentarily intrigued, she craned her head wanting to take a closer look. Murderous intent radiated from Zai's sword. Fengjoo did not detect this sort of deadly antagonism moments ago even as he was cutting off the Silver Serpent's tail. The Silver Serpent seemed to be sensing this as well, as it was showing some gratified enjoyment. But in a split second, its stomach had received a stab of the sword's blade. The ice coffin began its descent from the sky. During the falling process, there was a moment when Fengjoo felt she saw very clearly the face of the person in the coffin. Without time to be surprised, however, she underwent an otherworldly sensation that felt as though her soul was leaving from her body, her mind a black mass. By the time she collected herself and after her dizziness dissipated, she was startled to find that she seemed to be falling through the air. A hand wrapped around her waist as she dove into a chest laced with the scents of white sandalwood and blood. Rapid wind contrasted his steady heartbeats. Fengjoo tried to raise her head. She caught a pair of clouded eyes as she gazed up. These eyes were as cold as frozen snow, but they suddenly widened when they caught sight of her face and eyes. How beautiful! Even King Kaiu's most beautiful spring light shining on a snowfield couldn't compare. Amid her wandering thoughts, she felt his grasp around her tightening and the breathing near her ears becoming somewhat unstable. There was a certain anxiety in Zai Shenjun. Was her presence here such an exciting thing? Fengjoo was made perplexed. The wind flapped about, but only in an instant. A hoarse voice spoke 2 words into her ear, "Hide well." Next thing she knew, she was pushed away. Although it was a critical moment, he used just enough force, lending her no discomfort when she dropped onto the branch of the bailo tree. By the time she looked up again, Zeiss had already ridden on the wind far, far away, leading the Silver Serpent completely away from the swamp and seemingly intending to have a new battleground on the bare mountain nearby. Fengjoo sat on a bailo branch. She raised her hand to her forehead and glanced in the direction of the bald mountain. She did not see anything, all she heard was the serpent's occasional painful screeches. Although she expected Zeiss to have the upper hand, she could not help herself from worrying. The new moon was a crescent, the lake a bright mirror. Perched on a crook of the tree, she startlingly discovered a beautiful woman reflected on the lake's surface. Fengjoo took a closer look at the lovely face on the clear water and tumbled down from the branch. After tremblingly climbing out of the water, Fengjoo truly wanted to cry. She finally figured out why Zeiss had been so surprised. It turned out the Ice Coffin beauty had woken up. Where did the awakened beauty go? A minute ago, she was in Zeiss' arms, now she was lying on shore on the verge of tears. The thoroughly near tears. Fengjoo felt that her luck was utterly rotten today. Who else in this world had her kind of luck? She only went out for some fun, but she still somehow managed to let her soul go into someone else's body. Mo Xiao said this place was a little chaotic. She didn't expect it to be this chaotic. She was now in the Ice Coffin beauty's body. She didn't even know how she entered it. She had left Urania's body, and didn't know how it was doing presently. Before her tears could come out, a burst of anguished cries emerged from behind the bailo trees. She recognized that the wails were coming from the little fish sprite who sat next to her. 2 lines of fish sprites surrounding him were also silently wiping their tears away. The ground where they stood lay Urania's stiff body. The little fish sprite whom she had only met by chance cried himself to a fainting spell, "Pretty Jija, how could you not bear the fright? How could you have been scared to death?" The small body struggled to keep itself from collapsing as he sniffed his nose. Mother said when someone passed away, we should light her 2 sticks of incense. We don't have any incense, we will give you some soybeans. The rest of the fish sprites followed suit. Urania's body was soon covered in boiled peanuts and soybeans. The little fish sprite's righteousness moved Fengjoo. She remained moved until they took out a flint to cremate Urania. Before the fire could start, Fengjoo casted a spell from her hiding position behind the tree to push Urania's body into the water. As soon as the corpse hit the water, she wiped the cold sweat on her forehead and quietly dove into the lake. Fengjoo surmised that once she neared Urania's body, there was a chance they would immediately switch back. That meant she and the Ice Coffin girl would each go back to her own place. Wouldn't that be fortunate? She held Urania's hand underwater, there was no response. She hugged Urania, still, there was no response. She recited a soul-lifting incantation, but this time she felt as if her 3 souls and 7 spirits were bound to the body of the Ice Coffin beauty, unable to break free. This matter needed a bit thinking over. She wasn't the real Urania, so she wasn't particularly emotional that she couldn't change back. But with Urania's face, she didn't have to worry about food and clothing expenses. Alternatively, with the Ice Coffin beauty's face, should she follow these fish sprites every day to eat soybeans? The taste of soybeans was unique when eaten occasionally, but eating them every day would be traumatic. Moreover, she had promised Mo Xiao to use Aranya's identity to help him. Giving up halfway wasn't in line with her principles. Fengjoo contemplated underwater. Since she couldn't change back, what other ways were there to make everyone continue believing that she was Aranya? Applying a correction spell. Replacing all of the Bianiao's memory related to Aranya's appearance with that of the beauty inside the ice coffin may be a way. Fengju recalled a famous saying from her aunt, Bai Qian, only academically poor people are the true geniuses. Fengju admired herself for being a genius and praised her aunt's insights now that she was able to come up with such a good idea in such a short time. But being a bad student still had its problems. She was dozing off when her teacher taught this correction spell. What was the rune used for this spell again? The ice coffin which was brought out by the Silver Serpent now rested at the bottom of the lake just under their feet. Fengju haphazardly stowed Aranya into the ice coffin, haphazardly applied a correction spell according to a hazy recollection, then haphazardly assured herself that if she was a real genius, there would be nothing to a minor correction spell. After completing these actions, she discarded all troubles from her mind and stepped onto the water bubbles to surface the lake, intending to give her attention to the progression of Zai's fight. The fish sprites who came for the excitement had scattered away, leaving behind a row of wilted lotus leaves on the shore. There seemed to be no movement on the distant mountain. Fengju felt a moment of inexplicable emptiness. She gazed down into the lake once more. The reflection in the water had long flowing hair, a purple male robe draped outside her white dress. She even looked vaguely familiar. A light suddenly flashed in Fengju's mind. Could the girl in this ice coffin be her true body? She couldn't return to Aranya's body. Was it because she had the fortune to return to her own? This idea caused her to take an unsteady step backward. But she had no time to ponder. Dense lightning all of a sudden raided from the horizon, claps of thunder ensued. A demon must have been vanquished for there to be this strange phenomenon in the sky. As expected, the water serpent's painful growls resonated from atop the bare mountain. Cold rain pelted down. Through the veil of forest's bright brilliance, she could perceive the rainstorm was a crimson red. Fengju raised her head and anxiously searched for Zai's traces. But in the hazy mist and rain, she only saw the purple-robed deity's staggered silhouette in the far distance. His body remained without magical protection, his long silvery hair blown in the wind. The sword in his hand seemed to have drunk enough blood, glowing a faint ruddiness while casting an imposing force. Blood saturated through the serpent's body, one could no longer recognize its original silver-scaled form. Its eyes revealed a belligerence, exposing a terribly menacing appearance. Fengju couldn't help but shudder. Provoked into fury, the trapped beast tossed its head in massive roars. Like lightning, it rammed its horn toward the purple-robed deity in madness as though it had abandoned all of its magical ability and wanted to use sheer force in one final fight. With her heart in her throat, Fengju screamed for him to dodge. Yet instead of dodging, the purple-robed deity raised his sword to meet it, his movement steady and fast, cutting straight across the serpent's head with a force that could cut through wind and rain. While he stood there unbudgingly, the serpent's hard horn inevitably drilled into his body. In that instant, her eyesight strangely sharpened. Fengjoo saw him flip his hand and dissever the serpent's horn from his shoulder. Except for a slight frown, no other expression which would indicate pain surfaced on his face. In the blink of an eye, the Bale of Forest's brilliance vanished, giving way to an envelope of darkness. Fengjoo imagined she had felt a mighty tremor when the water serpent's head fell to the ground. She shouted Zai's name, but no one responded. She stumblingly hopped onto a small cloud and neared the bare mountain. The air was thick with blood. She repeatedly cried for Zai's, but her cries remained unreplied. There was a full moon in the sky, a strange sight to have on what was the 2nd of April. Rain came down more heavily, fading away the pigment of blood. After absorbing enough rainwater, Fengjoo's small cloud became soggy and could no longer stay afloat. It finally came to a stop at a mountain cave on the bare mountain. She was completely drenched in rainwater, coldness seeped deep into her organs. Where was Zai's? Was he badly hurt? Or had he already? Recently, he had been treating her quite well. He ventured to Kongshan to fetch her huanko, he sent her fish, and when she was entrapped by her two sisters, he also came to her rescue. She didn't know if her panic was due to sympathy or something else, or whether her trembling body was due to the cold or the fear of something else. She didn't think she could remain waiting in this cave. Moreover, it was raining quite intensely outside. Regardless whether he was hurt or not, she must go look for him. As she was about to rush out into the cascading rain again, behind her came a faint sound from the cave. In these old caves deep in the woods, there likely were a number of exotic creatures. Fengjoo moved along the wall and probed a few steps inside. She took another step or two when she did not detect the breathing of beasts. A familiar bloody scent floated into her nose. Before she could even lean against the rock wall for stability, Fengjoo tentatively shouted Zai's name in a quivering voice and fell into the cave. It was a little better at the entrance where she could vaguely see a person's shadow under the moonlight. But it was now as black as ink inside the cave. She had always been afraid of the dark. Ever since she walked alone at night and fell into a snake pit in her childhood, she did not dare to go out again during nighttime. She didn't know where her guts were borrowed from tonight. Darkness abound, not a ray of light inside the damp cave. Overtaken with fright, she quaveringly prepared to dig out an illuminating pearl from her sleeve to light the way. Had she thought about this just a moment ago at the entrance, she wouldn't have rolled into the cave so disgracefully. She didn't know why she forgot about this then. Her fingers had only touched the pearl inside her sleeve when she suddenly felt a strong force pulling her from behind. She gave a cry in surprise as she heard the sound of the pearl dropping to the ground. It rolled straight down a slope into a small pond. A mass of faint light radiated from the water, but it only shone to her feet. She only now found herself standing next to a snake on the ground. One more step and she would have been unable to avoid having its fangs driven into her leg. At the moment, the snake was lying in halves. A hand grasped her waist, holding her close within his arms. Although she was only a young girl, she had after all been the queen of King Kaihu for so many years, and was still exposed to some home teachings. She knew that in these moments, her savior didn't necessarily have to be friends instead of enemies. She needed to stay vigilant. She pulled herself together. Employing a move a mortal crook might use, she unintentionally grazed the hand which wrapped around her waist, wanting to know the general identity of the person behind her. His hand was very smooth and his index finger was not covered in scales, which meant he was neither a mountain goblin nor a local demon. The tip of his little finger was smooth and round, which meant he also did not belong to either the ghoul clan or the demon clan. His palm was much larger than her own, so he must be a man. Slender fingers, delicate skin, he seemed to be a spoiled rich boy. On his palm was a thin callus. This spoiled rich boy also occasionally practiced some weaponry. She was about to probe further when she suddenly felt the breathing behind her stifled. There was also a strong force. By the time she belatedly reacted, Fengjoo found herself pressed against the rock wall behind her, trapped in between the cave wall and this rich boy. Drops of water trickled from the cave stalactites down into the small lake. Drip, drip. Her hands were pinned above her head in the dim light. The pampered rich boy adhered close to her as he studied her with an expressionless look. His dry fingers stroked her cheek in the same way she had stroked him just now, feeling her eyebrows, her eyes, her nose, unintentionally. She didn't know this caressing business was so sultry a thing. Had she known, she wouldn't have dared even if she had borrowed 1,000 guts. That's right, she should mention that the spoiled rich boy was Lord Zei's. Moments ago, she did not guess it was Zei's because his hand was warm and dry. It didn't have any sticky bloodstains, and was so clean it didn't seem like a hand that had slain a water serpent. At this point in hindsight, she and Zei's could be considered to have met multiple times, but she hadn't really ever seen his struggling appearance. From the way he was acting, it seemed as though he had satisfactorily cleaned himself up after leaving the battlefield. His fingers stopped at her lips, caressing her as though he was standing in front of a wall screen, completely absorbed, and painting its edges into a masterpiece. Fengjoo could not help but take a deep breath. The fingers which were brushing on her lips came to a still. Fengjoo nervously moistened her lips. Zei's normally glacial eyes suddenly became clouded. Sensing something wasn't quite right, she instinctively withdrew from him. She was pressed more tightly onto the cave wall, however. In an instant, Zei's lips crushed onto hers. A belated gasp let open her lips, allowing his tongue to pry open her teeth and snake into her mouth. His eyes were closed. Each of his actions was calm and elegant, but his strength was like that of a whirlwind. She tried to struggle, but her hands were firmly held by his, and she wasn't able to resist. She smelled the scent of blood and white sandalwood. Her originally lucid mind suddenly gave way to a stretch of fog. Fengjoo felt lightheaded. Under such force, she almost let escape a moan, but fortunately was able to control herself. Yet this mouth tussling trapped a great deal of breathing air. When he lightened his force, it inadvertently drifted out. Her hands that were clasped over her head were released. He held her waist with one hand and pulled her closer to him. His other hand stroked her shoulder, then inched up to support her head to prevent her from sliding down in case she could not hold on. Her free hands circled his neck on their own accord, forgetting to struggle. His kiss deepened. She didn't know why this felt so familiar, as if her hands should know to be placed in that position during such times. Her mind went blank as his lips moved to her neck. His warm breath was caressing her earlobe. Her body felt like some sort of lotus plant, ignited by his hands and combusting in terrifying flames. This was a bit like. Her head suddenly ached, frigid rain pounding in her mind. Then the fog cleared, ushering in a light breeze. Her mind returned. The sound of dripping water suddenly echoed in the cave. As if they paid no attention to the two of them, the stalactites let trickle a few drops of water. It sounded like the ringing of a zither in the otherwise silent space. She pushed Zai's chest away. Her effort was quite forceful, but it was ineffective. His lips grazed over her collarbone as he grunted in pain. He buried his head in her left shoulder and held onto her waist as he whispered, "Hey, don't push. I feel dizzy." Her hand on his chest felt damp. When she raised it to her eyes, by the warm light of the sunken pearl in the pond, Fengjoo sucked in her breath as she saw her hand covering in blood. She vaguely perceived words jumping from her mouth. "You bled so much, it would be stranger if you weren't dizzy." The man leaning on her shoulder seemed to become weaker. "Don't move, let me lean on you a while." The smell of blood was increasingly thickening. Fengjoo gritted her teeth and said, "Just leaning on me won't do, you need to lie down. Your wound hadn't even been bandaged." "You came when I was about to bandage it," Zai replied in a lowered voice. Fengjoo muttered, "I didn't agree to let you put me against the wall, though." Zai ignored her words and said, "That's because it didn't hurt just now." He next said, "Don't provoke me into speaking. The more I talk, the more it hurts." After she supported an injured Zai down, Fengjoo absent-mindedly asked herself what this scenario was counted as. She was taken advantage of, and taken thoroughly at that. It stood to reason that she should be angry. Any brave lady would slap him and call it light punishment. But to take advantage of this person who was suffering a serious injury, this person who was already sick enough without her slapping him, lying in front of her near collapse, how could she care to inflict on him more injury? She could not understand where his strength had come from just now. That sort of display had really made her a little frightened. She never thought that the word kiss could also have such a serious meaning even in her dreams. In fact, she could be considered to have gained some experience today. There were only a faint soft light and their shadows reflecting on the cave wall inside the cave as they listened to the ceaseless rain outside. Listening to the rustling rain, Fengjoo was momentarily lost in thoughts. In the nine-tailed fox clan of King Kaiu, 30,000 years old was still young enough to be considered juvenile. At her age, she was qualified to experience love, but it was still a few thousand years too soon for the deeper bedroom affairs. When she was a little fox whose fur had not grown full, she was infatuated with Donghua Daijun and heard from Jian that rather than a passionate lady, Daijun probably preferred the purer kind. For that reason, she wholeheartedly made herself as pure as could be. In her school days, a few of her naughty classmates had brought some naughty books to school and invited her to read with them. She would have read them if Donghua Daijun didn't have that sort of ideals. But at the thought of Daijun's innocent dream girl, she confiscated the books and gifted them all to her aunt. It should have been a good time to learn about bedroom affairs when she was forced to marry Kang Yi. It was expected that before the wedding, her mother would impart to her some knowledge. But because she was tied up inside the palanquin and stirred the entire country into a pot of confused porridge, her mother, who was prematurely aging from the exhaustion of enduring her fights, unsurprisingly forgot to teach her. When she went to the mortal realm to repay a favor, the emperor surnamed Song and Yakingti were both honest men who believed they would already be compromising her if they just held her little pinky without her permission. Naturally, there was no need for such topics. Fengjoo was now surprised to find that at her age, she was already forced to marry 3 times in all, the Song Emperor, Yakingti, and Zai Shenjun. Kang Yi Shenjun could be considered a failed wedding. And right now, she was bearing a widow's name whilst forced to have a husband. Of course, this case and others weren't actually bizarre for them as gods. The bizarre thing was that she still knew nothing of bedroom affairs even till now. That year when she so persistently chased after Dong Hua, she humbly believed her little amount of experience could be considered as amour, but where on heaven and earth did such amour exist? She was too inexperienced in the past. Today, after some comparison and analysis, she came to conclude that among immortal goddesses, her pure kind of love and her aunt's marriage at 140,000 years of age were really bizarre love fates. Her maternal aunts often bemoaned that despite her beautiful looks, she just didn't have any seductive skills. She was so hopeless that they would sigh again and again each time they saw her. She came to realize today that she had indeed shamed the Red Fox family. In the past, when her aunts had sighed in resignation, she had also pondered that if she were able to win over the loveless and desireless Dong Hua Daijun, it would be an accomplishment greater than any enchantress could ever dream of achieving. She'd be able to restore the Red Fox's reputation, and all the young foxes in the clan would come to worship her. When her pursuit of Daijun ended without success, she learned that being a renowned enchantress was perhaps not that glorious of an endeavor. She no longer had this ambition, all was forgotten. After so much thoughts, she only felt that she had made herself too innocent throughout the years. When she had time, she should go to the market and buy a few erotica. She wondered which store would sell that sort of books. Dried firewood crackled and popped in the burning flames. She had just used magic to dry a few bundles of wet firewood from outside. Half was burned to fend off the cold and to drive away snakes, the other half was lightly spread out and draped under the purple robe she had on her into a temporary bed for Zai's. Her purple robe seemed quite like the one on Zai's, but she did not think much about it. At this point, the cave was lit bright under the firelight's glow. Although Shuiyu Swamp was disorderly, it could also be considered a propitious place. The surrounding small hills were all unearthly beautiful, and even this small cave seemed rather extraordinary. They stayed here for the time being. Inside the expansive cave, walls were webbed with wisterias, their shadows reflected by the fire glow. Next to the small pond was the surprising presence of a Zen tree whose canopy was leafy even in this perpetual darkness. In the pond drifted several 8-petal lotuses, either white or red. This place seemed as though it was made for meditating. Lord Zai's lay on the temporary straw bed she made, his face still pale. A blotch of blood stained through the bandage where he had been impaled by the serpent, but his spirit seemed much better. Fengju was glad it was only his shoulder that got pierced by the serpent's horn. She asked from a distance away, "Is it still painful and uncomfortable? Can I talk to you?" To Zai's, she appeared to be sitting at the other end of the cave. He frowned. "Yes, but at this distance, you might want to shout." Fengju moved a few inches closer and paused her eyes on his bleeding shoulder. Feeling pain and discomfort on his behalf, she asked, "When it came at you, why didn't you dodge from it?" I can't really hear you. Can you speak louder? Fengjoo puffed her cheeks and neared a few more inches as she peevishly said, I'm sure you can hear me. But Zai's deadpan face seemed as though if she did not sit next to him, he would never open his mouth. Being extremely curious, she held a straw cushion and shyly came to him, then asked again, why didn't you avoid it? Why would I avoid it? Zai said as he regarded her. I've waited 2 days for this opportunity. If I hadn't put myself in danger, how could I have put it to death? He said these words with little gravity, but Fengjoo listened to them fearfully, and she rationally countered, there are some who won battles all the time without putting themselves in the sort of predicament as you did. You're too reckless. Yet in her mind, she knew that he was not reckless and that everything he did was with composure. Otherwise, the serpent's horn wouldn't pierce only his shoulder. She hadn't been on battlefields, but she generally understood the strategies involved in fighting. And in a verbal fight, the most important thing was of course luring each other into provocation. A win in such cases would still be considered valorous. Zai's was not provoked as she had assumed. Instead, his eyes were filled with puzzlement. Does everyone call these trivial things a battle these days? It's nothing but child's play. This instance of serpent slaying isn't worth mentioning either. Fengjoo dryly replied, you were too overly confident back there. Had you used magic, it wouldn't be this bad. Why didn't you use magic? Zai's thought about this question for a moment and tentatively offered, to prove that I'm good at fighting. Fengjoo grabbed a small rock wanting to give him more damage, but Zai's held her hand as he studied her face. He lowered his voice, are you angry because my kissing wasn't good enough just now? Fengjoo held the small rock as her mind briefly vacated her brain. She was completely at a loss as to how they arrived at this topic. Weren't they just talking about something serious? She was momentarily befuddled, all her blood rushing to her head. She gritted her teeth and asked, don't they say you're an abstemious deity? Zai's contemplated for a second and replied, I've been poisoned by the serpent's venomous blood. Fengjoo searched his face. Presently, this handsome and pale face was utterly sincere, and she supposed his argument was somewhat credible. For some reason, Zai's had been friendlier to her recently. Thinking back to the day when she was drugged by Junyo with lovesick potion, she had seduced him in every possible way, yet his gentlemanly resolves were not shaken, and he did not take advantage of the situation. Although he often did perplexing things, she was sure he was an honorable gentleman. She inwardly believed it was something beyond his control. Although she was taken advantage of, he must also be feeling awful, and she suddenly felt sympathetic. I have read from my aunt's books that there had frequently been those who were similarly poisoned, some graver compared to you. If that was for detoxification, then I'm not the sort of immortal who doesn't have that Hippocratic or whatever mindset. Let's not mention this again, you also don't have to feel guilty, just forget it. Zai's agreed. All right, I'll try not to feel guilty. He turned sideways and said, sing a folk song for me. Why? Fengjoo dubiously asked. It hurts too much, I can't sleep. Although he was nothing but a pack of lies, Fengjoo believed him without so much as a doubt, and the word hurt instantly dug into her heart. A strong person occasionally showing weakness was even more pitiable, and she was made even more sympathetic. She noted that Zeiss was still holding her hand, but she did not feel that he was taking advantage of her anymore. Instead, she expected him to be in severe pain, and he was just seeking support. Once her compassionate heart was born, it kind of grew out of hand. Perceiving that it was inconvenient for Zeiss to hold her hand, she simply abandoned her small cushion and moved to sit beside him. She knew Zeiss' spirits weren't good at this time, and thus only picked some soft nursery rhymes to sing. A slight echo drifted in the cave like a layer of fog. Zeiss' head rested on her lap as he held her hand close to his chest. His eyes were slightly closed, and he seemed to be at peace. She expected he was asleep and stopped singing, but she heard his low voice say, "In my childhood, I had also heard a number of nursery rhymes, they were different from your singing." "You don't sing," Fengjoo replied. Zeiss' eyes remained closed. "Who says I don't?" he said, then softly hummed, "Bright moon on the night of the 15th, the green hill a moonlight sheen. Short fences line the foothills, a maiden sows green-colored beans. Green vines wreathe the fences, and from them green posies gleam. Green posies are plucked down for toffee and cream." In Fengjoo's consciousness, even her father had not sung nursery rhymes to lull her in her childhood. In her 30,000 years of experience, she never associated the words nursery rhymes with men. But Zeiss' singing made her realize her impression with respect to nursery rhymes and men had been wrong. His voice was already very nice, and when he sang, his voice was deep, rendering the song into an ancient hymn. She heard her grandmother sing this song once before, but it didn't have the same feeling. Much later, she recovered and softened her voice. "I've heard this song before, but the last line isn't like that. It's for dowry. From green vines grew green posies. Green posies are plucked down for dowry." "You changed the lyrics, didn't you? Did you like to eat toffee when you were younger?" The cave briefly fell into silence. The fire was about to go out. She leaned against a Zen tree. Zeiss' voice was even lower than her own. "I probably would if I had eaten it. I didn't have parents, so no one gave me toffee when I was young. I might have felt envious watching other people eat." Fengju was dozing off sleepily, but his words made her a little sad when they entered her ears. She couldn't help but clasp his fingers. She was learning more about Zeiss tonight. "You'll make some for me later?" She gently nodded when she heard him ask. In her heavy sleepiness, Fengju realized he could not see with his eyes closed and caressed his fingers as though she was soothing a child. "All right, I'll make some for you. I make toffee the best." In the dwindling fire glow, the wisteria's shadows gradually faded away on the cave walls. The 8-petal lotuses in the pond also closed up. The purple-robed deity opened his eyes and saw the maiden's sleeping face. Her dark raven tresses hung loose to the ground like a stretch of black silk. Not bun up, it revealed an elegant and childlike face. The vermilion phoenix mark unfurled on her forehead like phoenix quills, adorning her snow-white face exquisitely. This was Fengju, the queen he had chosen. However, she applied this correction spell very sloppily. This level of correction sorcery could only fool Cha-Cha and other fairies with paltry magic. He caressed the flower mark on her forehead and fixed the correction spell cast on her body. She muttered a thing or two, but did not wake up. Interbreeding was not easy between a 9-tailed white fox and a red fox. As the only nine-tailed red fox in the world, she also grew up so handsomely, thus it could be considered ancestral blessings. He reckoned he actually had very perceptive eyes. But there was some strange matters. He was convinced he had personally placed Xiao Bai's soul into Junyo's womb, yet she ended up entering Aranya's body. He previously attributed this to the flawed creation of this world, but today, her own soul had returned to its original body. This was highly unusual. If he were to say Xiao Bai was Aranya, and Aranya was Xiao Bai, Daijun conveniently cast a sleeping spell at Fengjoo's brow, rose, and carried her out of the cave. His shoulder wound still hurt, but he was used to this sort of pain. He put on a happy face in front of Fengjoo because he discovered Xiao Bai was quite soft-hearted. As long as he put on a feeble front, even if he provoked her monstrous anger, it could easily be resolved. This was Xiao Bai's fatal weakness, but he wasn't worried whether other male deities would take advantage of this vulnerability of hers. Even if they had such intention, they might not have the thick skin to do it. He sometimes really didn't understand these people. Skin and face were corporeal stuff, were they that important? Stars dotted outside, cold rain had stopped. In only an instant, he found Aranya's body in the sunken ice coffin at the bottom of the water. Daijun held Fengju as he summoned a puff of cloud to carry Aranya's ice coffin. When he left the lawless swamp and averted his attention to the case, Aranya's body was disappearing little by little as anticipated until it left no traces behind. Within moments, there was no longer a beautiful woman inside the ice coffin. Fengju, who had her arms wrapped around his neck, suddenly stirred within his hold. He found an old tree to sit down and let her lie in his arms more comfortably. He slightly furrowed his brow in pensive thoughts. This was a replacement. Because Xiao Bai was Aranya, or because Aranya was a reincarnation of Xiao Bai's, her soul thus entered Aranya's body and replaced Aranya's soul, disregarding his sorceress interference. If he hadn't brought Xiao Bai's body to rest at Shuiyu Swamp, if her body had also adopted this world's mechanism, she would have completely taken over Aranya from shell to soul, just like this time. But if Xiao Bai was really Aranya, if he didn't remember incorrectly, Aranya was born 295 years ago, in the 5th year of King Wude Xiangliqu's reign during the Bianiao clan's twilight days of their golden era. 300 years ago, he had spent the majority of his cultivation to patch the Miao Ihwiming realm when it showed signs of collapse and threatened to bring the first calamity of the world. To make up for the lost cultivation, he had needed to sleep for nearly 100 years. When Aranya was born, he should be in a dreamless eternal sleep. Although he wasn't aware of what went on in the world, according to Zhonglin's subsequent report on the fairy realm's matters, Xiao Bai should be self-cultivating in King Kaiyu at that time. Gossipmonger Siming also mentioned that in these 300 years, the only time Xiao Bai left King Kaiyu for a prolonged time was 228 years ago when she went to the mortal realm to repay some favor for nearly a decade. That was to say, when Aranya came into the world, it wasn't possible for Xiao Bai to be in Fanyan Valley. The timelines did not match, and their appearances also did not match. Xiao Bai and Aranya were undoubtedly connected, though what the ties were ultimately, there was no way to investigate right now. If there was a Miaohua glass here, he could look into Aranya's past and present lives, and everything could easily be solved. But unfortunately, the Miaohua glass was currently on Zhukongtian. He had always thought this waterfall of a mirror didn't have any great uses other than looking elegant. He didn't expect there would be a time when it would come in handy. For the time being, he could only try making it. He reckoned he needed to find out whether there were suitable materials around here. He recalled that Fanyan Valley had several divine peaks. It had been a while since he last made a mirror, and the Miahua glass could be considered one of the more difficult ones to make. It should take him a while. End of Chapter 8.